the Milford Readers and Writers Festival's website, which is milfordreadersandwriters.com. We'll also have those videos that some of you watched quite a few times while we were getting started. Those videos are by Christopher King and Endless Echo. It's a wonderful video.
I want to have a little tiny picture of somebody.
Okay, somebody needs to mute who's talking about a tiny picture of someone.
Sorry.
We heard the sorry.
Sorry.
You know where your mute
Okay,
button is? Okay. Those videos are by Christopher King, wonderful video of Milford, another video of our festival itself. And they're just really a great representation of what a wonderful community Milford is. I'm biased, I'm the mayor, but I can tell you we also have a culturally vibrant community. We have a literary tradition that goes well back into the 19th century. Stephen Crane lived here one summer, camping outdoors, the summer before the Red Badge of Courage was published. Thomas Wolfe lived at the Hotel Fauchère in the summer of 1933 when he was working on a book. And of course, in recent years, we have had the biggest literary stars really in practically in the world at our festival every year. So I want to thank our funders who make this possible. All of you are here tonight, and we don't charge any admission or any fee to participate in this program. We're really proud and happy to be able to provide it to anyone who has internet access and can log in, but it still costs money to produce a festival. So we're particularly grateful to the Greater Pike Community Foundation, the Pennsylvania Council on the Arts, and AIE-NEPA, which is a regional arts organization, and also all the individual donors. Many of you on this call have contributed to the festival, and I'd urge you to, if you enjoy this tonight, go to milfordreadersandwriters.com. There's a donate button there, and if you can contribute something, that would be good. Now, I have the really wonderful pleasure. Oh, and by the way, at milfordreadersandwriters.com, you'll see some of the previous programs we did online. A wonderful conversation between Gloria Steinem and Suzanne Levine. Suzanne is on the board of our festival. A great conversation with Mark King and about the book, Not All Boys Are Blue, George Johnson's book. There's a science fiction panel. There's several programs that were previously recorded that are on the website. If we were instead talking about fairy tales tonight, when we got to the part where the star of the story looks in the mirror and says, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all?" Everybody in Pike County, Pennsylvania would immediately say Amy Ferris is the fairest of them all. Sorry for the horrible pun, but Amy is a goddess, a leader and inspiration, and one of the founders of the Milford Readers and Writers Festival. She also has written books and screenplays and plays, and maybe even more important, she has inspired and taught and mentored and encouraged, I think, I'm sure it's thousands at this point of writers, and helping so many people find their voice in such a powerful way. So Amy is our moderator this evening, and I love her to death, as everybody who meets her does. And I give you Amy Ferris.
Am I allowed to say, "Oh, fuck"? Wow, thank you. Thank you. So I am really thrilled to be here. And I'm really, really thrilled that Sean is here. And this is an extraordinary event that we're pulling off here. And it is a really big deal to have a book published. And it's a really big deal to have a book become a movie. And it's a really big deal that we have John, and we have Richard, and we have Robert, and we have my mentor, David. So I'm going to ask each one of you to talk a little bit about yourselves and what you're doing now, because we all know what you have done. And John, can I just say thank you so much for being a champion for all of us. I mean that. So take it away, John.
Oh, all right.
Unmute you?
I'm
You're-
muted.
Okay.
What?
He's- I get to mute men tonight, excuse me.
Pardon? I have just put aside a project that had spent a lot of time on in New Orleans. Put it aside perhaps forever or not. But right now I am going over a lot of the columns that I wrote for Esquire to make that into a book. I'm midway through re-editing them. Some of them I wrote 30 years ago, so I have to go over them all. And that's what I'm doing now.
Thank you so much. Richard, can you speak a little bit about yourself right now? Is Richard not here? Okay.
He's muted.
Oh, Richard, unmute yourself.
You start.
There
How
you
many
go.
times? I will never say that to another man.
Yeah,
So
you know what?
please
That's karma.
unmute yourself.
Yeah.
Sorry. So I have had to reinvent myself because of the collapse of journalism. And so I'm devoting myself completely now to writing novels and books and some nonfiction books. So regarding my second novel, Buddhaland Brooklyn, I am executive producing that as a streaming television series with K&L Productions. The pilot is written and we can talk about it later, but I walked away from a Sony deal on that, and I can explain that later why. My most recent novel, The Man with No Borders, that's being developed as a feature film by Brillstein Entertainment. When I was in my 20s, I wrote an unauthorized biography of Pierre Cardin, who recently died, the French fashion designer. I'm playing around with turning that into a feature. And lastly, the last year I've written 2 books. The upside of being a pandemic is you have no distractions. And so I've written a novel, which is a murder mystery, loosely based on, well, it is based on a little village in eastern Pennsylvania. No secret as to what that was modeled on. And also I've worked on a nonfiction book. I'm helping a political, ambitious businessman who has hopes for high office to help him write his memoirs.
Thank you. And can I just say that you are a Buddha?
I wish,
Say that.
on a good day.
You are such a Buddha. David, can you give us a little bit about you, my mentor?
Well, I'm flattered to be considered your mentor, goddess. How does she get that goddess name? I don't know. Well, it's just through her
Oh, David, we'll talk later.
I was inside the studio system most of my life, and I did that largely because I started out as a writer. I started out as a writer very early and worked with Paramount, Warner Brothers, Fox. And by the time I was 25, I was fed up. I was fed up because writers were not treated well. I never got accurate feedback. And even though they're the foundation of any story system, the writers often are the last people to get accolades or just common decency in their lives. And so I joined the studio system and worked on trying to change that model into one that was a little more compassionate, that included writers in the process, told them what was going on with their project, stayed involved with the writers, brought many writers up through the days and worked on many books to movies, including more famously, probably Terms of Endearment and Forrest Gump. Now I find myself in retirement, encouraging other writers. We have started an organization called the Story Summit, in which we try to bring writers who have talent along in order to be able to help them create sustainable careers inside the system. And that's kind of what I'm doing now.
am really thrilled that I get to do that with you. So thank you. And when I say you are my mentor, you have mentored so many of us to be more and bigger than we ever thought we could.
Well, thank you very much. That's great coming from you. Thank you.
You're very, very welcome. And Robert, you did something that most people never get a chance to do. You took a play and you turned it into a movie. And the playwright was your friend. And it was here in Scranton, Pennsylvania, that was born. Can you talk a little bit about you doing that and what you're doing now?
Well, thank you all for coming. The Milford Readers and Writers Festival is very dear to my heart. And we have tried to put together these viral events to keep it alive during this horrible pandemic. First, let me tell you, I'm an attorney, and I created a law firm in New York that is a very prominent entertainment, intellectual property law firm. And we do many, many, many books to film projects. I stopped working at the law firm about 8 years ago, and I'm really proud to tell you the law firm is doing even better than it did when I was there. What I'm doing now is I'm being the executor of a number of estates. I'm consulting with people on projects. I am working with the Milford Readers and Writers Festival. But probably the most important thing that I'm doing is to stop defining myself by the projects that I'm doing. And when people say to me now, what are you doing? I say, well, I'm really trying to live mindfully in the present. And it's been a real trip for me, and it's working really well.
Thank you. Thank you, Bob. All right, I'm going to address this question to John and Richard, both authors of 2 incredible books. I think, John, your book is probably the best-selling book ever. Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil. Can we all give it up for John right this second? If you could, and I'm asking both of you as the authors of the book, what would you change in the movie, in the film?
Well, before the film was made, I was asked to read the script and make some comments, and I did. I had 208 comments to make. One of them, I think, was followed, the rest were ignored. So that, in fact, is where a writer stands when a movie is being made. The producers of a movie are spending millions of dollars, and they cannot waste time and money listening to the whims and wishes of the writer, who's no longer involved in the project. So what I would change, probably everything, but all I wanted from a movie of this book that I had worked on for 8 years was that it would make so much noise, it would promote the book so much that it would sell millions of copies. And I didn't really care what the movie was like, because you can't do a movie of Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil. It is a book about a city.
Right.
The movie that was eventually made, and all of the other directors who were talking about it, that's a movie about a murder that happens to take place in a city. So while my emphasis was on all of the characters, the wonderful characters who make up Savannah and Savannah itself, I didn't think that and they all had their stories, which were woven together in the book, and that took all of my time to do. The murder was an interesting murder, and it was dramatic in that setting, but it by itself, I didn't think would make a movie. So they turned it on its head. The murder became the focus of the movie, which was a mistake. The characters that I encountered and wrote about were really the main characters. And it's interesting, when we went to Savannah, when Clint Eastwood went to Savannah to start filming. I was there for the first 3 days. And at the same time, Robert Altman was finishing the movie Ginger Man in Savannah. And we met, and he said, the first thing he said to me was, I should be directing Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil. And I thought, oh my God, that's true. Because he was brilliant at producing, directing movies with lots of characters, ensemble productions, Nashville, Gosford Park, etc. So he would have been spectacular doing Midnight, but frankly, I didn't care. As I said, I just wanted it to hype the book so that the book sales would go further up. And I didn't frankly want to compete with a movie. My whole feeling about a movie of Midnight was that it would come, it would be released, sales would skyrocket of the book, and then it would get its ass out of town, which in fact is pretty much what it's done. I have no animosity about the movie. I'm delighted what it did for me and for the book. But that's pretty much my, by the way, the murder in Midnight happens on page 168. That shows you that it's really part of a mix and it's not the focal point of the book, whereas it is of the movie.
I just want to share a little story that happened in Milford, because this is all about Milford, Pennsylvania too, is that at the Hotel Fauchère, which is one of my very favorite places in the world, I was sitting with John and we were having lunch, or maybe I was having wine. Maybe that was what it was. And at the next table was a couple. And I turned and I said, okay, so who's your favorite author? What is your favorite book? And he said, Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil. And I said, wow, here's the author. That was the most amazing experience I have ever had witnessing remember? And he got up.
Yeah.
And her tote bag said Pen Swords. It was, she had a tote that said Pen Swords. And it was one of the most amazing moments because he got to meet his author hero. And only that can happen in a small town like Milford.
Right.
Am I right?
Yes.
Okay, so, I'm gonna go now to Richard because Richard is waiting. So Richard, I'm asking you the very, very same question. If you could change anything about the film, what would it be?
I really wouldn't change anything.
Okay, we'll go to another person then.
No, I can. After the film came out, I sent Lasse Hallström, the director, a note, and I said, what a writer wants. If you saw the film, if an audience saw the film and read our book, they would look at both as two distinct pieces of art. But they would see they have DNA, and you can't. And as a writer, you can't ask for more than that because film is its own medium, it's its own art, and it can't be a replica of what you've done. It's got to be its own thing, and the talent has to own it and make it their own. Your story and make it their own. But I can tell you, if there's time. That was not a point I arrived to easily. It was a very torturous and painful experience to get to that point where I was so Zen-like. But, and if there's time, I'll tell you sort of one of the more painful and kind of amusing humps I had to get over.
We are going to go back to that, Richard.
Okay.
We are definitely going to go back to that. And I'm going to ask Robert now. Can you talk a little bit about what it was like taking a play and turning it into a movie?
Yes.
Thank you.
Actually, the story of that championship season is the story of the playwright Jason Miller. When I met Jason, we were both in our early 30s. I was a young associate at a very prominent New York entertainment law firm. Jason was an unemployed actor. And as a side story, I was working in the office and no one else wanted to meet with him because he was referred to our office by one of the partners' dentists. And if anyone referred by a dentist couldn't be very interesting. Well, I had read the review of a play that had opened the week before at Joe Papp's Public Theater, and it was called That Championship Season. And the New York critics were hysterical about it. They were comparing Jason to Arthur Miller because the play had depth, it had complexity, and it became very, very popular. And very soon it moved to Broadway. But at the same time, this unemployed actor also had the leading role in The Exorcist. Jason Miller, who wrote Championship Season, was Father Karras, the young priest in Championship Season. So this man, who had basically been unknown, in 1 year won the Pulitzer Prize for drama, won a Tony for his production of Championship Season, and won an Academy Award nomination as an actor for The Exorcist. This was an awful lot to take in 1 year. And there began a 10-year odyssey to get that Championship Season made into a film. And as we go on tonight, I'll be able to tell you stories if you're interested. But we went through 3 production companies, 3 different groups of people who were trying to put this on the screen. Every time one of them didn't work, we had to begin all over again, putting together a package that would eventually be made into a film. This process took 10 years.
Wow.
And after we went through it, the final version, after we had been through screenwriters, we had been through directors, we had been through all kinds of stars. Jason ended up writing and directing the film, and he did a magnificent job, and details to follow.
Thank you, Bob. Speaking of details to follow, I'm going to introduce, that's wonderful. And David, you've read thousands of manuscripts and you've made a lot of extraordinary movies. I think about my friend Alexia, who wrote Sex, Love, and Spirit, and I read that book and I think, oh my God, that should be a movie. So I would love to ask you, as a studio executive, what it was like and what was the first book that you read that you went, this has to be a movie?
Well, you know, for anybody, you know, it's a gut response, isn't it? It's, you fall in love with the descriptions, you fall in love with the characters, you are emotionally involved. And I think with anything, you know, particularly in the creative arts, when you're looking at something, you're also got the audience in your mind and in your heart. So that when you look at a manuscript, you're not just reading it as an individual, but you're reading it with the idea that it would be a movie. I think for me, and it's a good story, and I see people like Nilda and Dragon on this who may have heard this story, but it's a good story because it celebrates the ordinary and that greatness can come from anywhere. When I was a young story editor at Paramount, I was in charge of getting 50,000 pieces of material through the gauntlet every year. That meant we hired readers, we had them synopsize the material. They would synopsize it down to 3 pages. The busy executives couldn't read, so they would look at a synopsis and make a decision as to whether or not they wanted to take that script or manuscript home. An agent who couldn't get anybody else on the phone called me, a story editor at Paramount, because I'm really, really low in the food chain, and said that she had a manuscript that I was from Ohio, and this was about the Midwest, and she thought that I would like it. I said, well, I don't really take submissions. You know, I'm a dispatcher for all the executives who are too busy meeting with stars to basically read. And by the way, in Hollywood, nobody reads. Nobody reads. And it's true. It's true. They will read coverage, but they won't read. So I took this manuscript, which used to be in like boxes, home with me, and I connected with it, as we all connect with material. I thought it had a transcendent message. It was about the inability to express emotion. It was a manuscript called Ordinary People. And because I had done a favor, which is essentially gotten Indiana Jones greenlit, which is another story, the head of the studio gave me permission to option it and develop it. And the interesting thing about this story particularly is the writer Judy Guest. Judy Guest was a housewife in Minnesota. And when her 2 children, 2 boys, would get on the school bus in the morning, she would walk them to the bus stop. She would go home, walk up the stairs to her little white writing room and write for 3 hours. She'd get the house ready and, get, and go back and pick up the children after school. She did this for 1.5 years, and in the process, she wrote Ordinary People. Well, it was a story about suicide. It was a story with a lot of unattractive characters in it, but it still spoke. And over time, Judy Guest came out to Hollywood and wrote the first draft of the screenplay because a guy, the Sundance Kid, popped into my office one day and he said, "You're the guy who's working on Ordinary People. I want to direct and star in that movie." And I said, "Well, how did you find me?" He said, "Barry Diller, who was the chairman of the company, sent him in." So long story short, Bob and I developed the material with Judy Guest. Judy took it as far as she could. And then when we brought in Alvin Sargent to complete the work. The picture went on to, I think, be nominated for 12 Academy Awards, 1 Best Picture, 1 Best Director, for Robert Redford, who very smartly, a week before production, says, "I can't really star and direct in the movie," which of course we were already way down the line. And he said, "But I have somebody to step in." And that's Donald Sutherland. I said, "Donald Sutherland, he's not a star." But we went with Donald Sutherland, and the rest is what it is. But it only takes one person inside the system to believe in you. The system is not the system. It is made up of creative people who respond to material because they have a connection with it. Your job is to create that connection with the person on the other side of the page, whoever that be. And there will be somebody, if the work is good enough or true enough and right in its time, that somebody will believe. I have seen it hundreds and hundreds of times where things, happen as a result of somebody stubborn enough and dedicated enough inside the system to say, well, I'm okay, so it's not for you. I'll move on. And all the great work all comes from so much rejection, it's impossible to even evaluate. So that's my little story.
Okay, so David, you also championed the Queen's Gambit.
Wow. Well,
And-
I
Yes?
I will tell you a very, very quick story.
Okay, it's gotta be quick because I gotta ask.
I'll be really quick. And this goes back a long time, 35 years. We developed, I love this book, Queen's Gambit. It had been written by the guy who did The Color of Money and Hustler, but beyond that, it had a great central character. And I was making teen bop movies at Paramount, like Pretty in Pink. And I knew that the Queen Bop girl with the red hair, Molly Ringwald, wanted to do something more important. And so I said, Molly, I'm going to option this little book. Would you like to star in it? So she read it and she comes into my office and she's wearing glasses. I said, why are you wearing glasses? She's like 16. Warren Beatty said I would look smarter and be treated more seriously. I said, okay. Do you need lenses? No, they're a prop. Okay. So she was the executive producer on it at 16 or 17. And we brought in the man who had just won the Academy Award for Last Emperor, Bernardo Bertolucci, who happened to share the same agent as Molly Ringwald. And Bernardo sat down with Molly and we started to get to work on the script that was to be produced and written by Alan Scott.
Wow.
Eventually, we could not put it together because we couldn't work out the schedule with Molly and Bernardo, because his pictures took several years and she was getting older and didn't feel that she could do it anymore. But Alan Scott stuck with that book and that project for 31 years. And, it's won every possible award, and it is absolutely fabulous and much better than we would ever thought as a long form, because we would have been looking at a 2-hour movie. And this was 8 hours. So again, the lesson there is persistence. Don't give up. And Alan, in all his machinations, found a way in limited series to get that movie made.
I love that story. And so I'm going to segue right now into, because you talked about Molly Ringwald and casting. So Richard and John, this is for you, and Robert. Can we talk about casting and what you thought of who starred in your movies? Did you have those actors in your mind? Was that who you thought when you were writing it? I mean, you were talking about Molly Ringwald, and 35 years later, it was a different actress. So, John.
Right. The names being discussed when the movie began to gather some steam in development, or the names were Tommy Lee Jones and Clint Eastwood, in fact, and Burt Reynolds. And I didn't have a favorite. I didn't care. So anyway, the final cast was Kevin Spacey and John Cusack. Kevin Spacey was a piece of work. I heard once Clint Eastwood decided to do the movie, he gave me a call, very nice call, and so did John Cusack. I didn't hear from Kevin Spacey, but I was invited by Clint Eastwood to come to the launch of the shooting of the movie, which started in Savannah. By the way, he had asked me to write the script. I had no interest in writing the script, and told him it would have to be a 24-hour movie if he didn't leave anything out. Anyway, so I got to Savannah, And the world's press was there because it was Clint Eastwood and Kevin Spacey and Midnight and whatever. And there was the night before the shooting was to begin, there was a press cocktail party with about 700 people. At that point, I saw Kevin Spacey standing at the bar, and I hadn't met him yet, hadn't heard from him. So I went over to him and I said, "Hi, I'm John Berendt." He said, "Oh, nice to meet you." He said, "You know, I've been here a couple of weeks already, researching Jim Williams's story." And I said, "No, I heard that. I think that's terrific, wonderful." He said, "That's a good thing I did, because I talked to some people you didn't talk to for your book." And I thought, really? And he said, "And it's a good thing I did, because I was able to pick up some things about Jim Williams that I didn't get from your book." Now, I bit my tongue and didn't say the obvious, which was, I hope my book doesn't stand in the way of your portrayal of Jim Williams. But Warner Brothers had some executives there, and I told them that story. They said, "John, we could tell you hours of stories, but we won't." So I didn't hear the other story. That was Kevin Spacey. He was a little too obstreperous in Savannah, and all the society ladies knew what he was doing in his off hours. I was amazed. So anyhow, and John Cusack was a lovely, sweet guy, very bright. When he first called me after he was hired to play me in the movie, he said, what do you think of what they've done to your wonderful book?" And I knew that meant that he wasn't too pleased with the script, although he was thrilled to be in the movie, particularly because it was being directed by Clint Eastwood. I couldn't blame him. But I also knew I did not want to get into a discussion of what his problems with the script were. So I said, "Well, you know, no script is the exact copy of the book, so I didn't expect it to be." And anyway, I avoided a conversation about the flaws of the movie that Clint was just about to shoot.
Thank you for that.
Clint was delightful, and he had all the crowds, everywhere in Savannah to see him, and they were held back by police lines. This is a tiny town, and it was quite remarkable. He was much admired, and he behaved beautifully. And
You know what? It's a tiny town that you put on the map, not unlike Milford, by the way.
That's true. It's a bit like Milford.
Right?
Anyway, that's.
I'm just a huge fan of you as a human. So, and you know that.
Yes.
Robert, can you talk about casting?
Oh, yes, because anyone who's involved in the film business knows there are three elements to a film. One is the screenplay, one is the director, and the third is the cast. And all three of these elements have to align at the same time. And there are so many projects that I've been involved in where one of these elements drops out just when you're about to start production, and then the entire project is over because you haven't got all of the pieces. This was a problem that we had with championship season. I'm not going to talk about our first incarnation because that was with a company that no longer exists, which was Playboy Enterprises. You know, if you look at in the 70s, Playboy magazine was a big deal. And Playboy magazine had unlimited money, and they wanted to produce films. And our film, which had a demographic of 5 men who were the audience for Playboy magazine, was a perfect movie for them. Well, they never got it together. Their problem was the screenplay. The second incarnation had a different cast of characters. The project was led by Billy Friedkin, who at that point was one of the most successful directors in America. Friedkin had done Exorcist, he had done French Connection. So he was about as high-end a director as you could possibly get. He decided he wanted to do this film. And he said, Jason, who can write the screenplay better than you? So he got Jason to write the screenplay. So we had a screenplay and we had a director. Then came the problem. The ideal cast, I don't know how many of you have actually seen Championship Season, but it's about a high school basketball team that won a championship under really suspicious circumstances. And it's really about male bonding and macho, and it takes place in the late 60s. The central character is the coach. And I guess the analogy is the coach is like the sun in the sky. And all these players were like planets that revolved around the coach, but were always in his gravitational pull. And the coach was the most important character in this film. And everyone agreed on who the perfect coach was. And I don't know who you would guess, but it was George C. Scott. George Scott was the most powerful actor around, especially after he did Patton. You saw this was a man who elicited loyalty and courage and responses from his people. And George agreed to do the film. The financing was all in place. One day, we get a call from George Scott's assistant who demanded that everyone involved in this film meet in Los Angeles at the Bel Air Hotel. And we had no idea what it was that he wanted to say to everybody. But of course, it was George Scott. He was central to this film. And we all dutifully went out to the Bel Air, where George had booked a conference room. And there must have been 8 or 9 people, the financiers, us, Billy Friedkin. And George Scott went into a lunatic tirade about how he hated Bill Friedkin, called him all kinds of names. He said, this is the worst human being I have ever known, I've ever worked with, and I am not doing this movie.
Okay, Bob, 30 seconds more.
Okay, well, the financing fell apart. And then we had one more choice. We went to William Holden, who agreed to do it. And what happened was William Holden died before the production started. And then it ended. And that was the second incarnation. And if we have time, I'll tell you about the third because it's just as interesting.
We do have time. And I'm sure that someone will ask about that. And I want to ask Richard a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Richard, you're a brilliant writer.
Thank you.
You are a brilliant writer. How did you feel about somebody writing the screenplay to your absolutely glorious book? And can I just say, we're talking, people asked what books are, John wrote Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, and David produced everything from Ordinary People to Queen's Gambit, and we have The 100-Foot Journey right now. So
The 100-Foot Journey, what happened was I really was a total unknown. A television producer with National Geographic grabbed the film rights, and I thought, I maybe get a little bit of option money. But my book started to take off as an international bestseller, and while the book was taking off, she got Oprah and Spielberg involved. So the scriptwriter was Stephen Knight, who's a big deal in Hollywood. He people will know him today most as the showrunner behind Peaky Blinders.
Yeah.
He's like one of these $1 million to $2 million script characters in Hollywood. And at the time, DreamWorks really wanted him to do a turnaround. A turnaround is a project that's stalled, and they buy it from another studio and turn it around and make it of Rebecca, the Daphne du Maurier,
Right.
great film, the great film noir film. So anyway, they wanted him to do that, and they said, but we will give you the pick of anything in our portfolio. I was blessed that he picked, he's a bit of a foodie, he picked the 100-Foot Journey as his passion project. And so the studios like to do, because what happens is that, I mean, David could explain this better, but what happens is they pay top price for the Rebecca turnaround. So they'll give him his $1.5 million for that script. But for the passion project, he will charge a fraction of his normal salary. So what the studio does is then amortizes the two deals, scripts together, and they get a bargain. Because it brings down they get 2 films from the great Stephen Knight at an average. If you take the average between the two, they're actually getting Rebecca at a. So anyway, so I was Stephen Knight's, and Stephen Knight, he had won an Academy Award nomination for a great film that he had written, which I love, which was Eastern Promises. It's with Viggo Mortensen. It's about the Russian mob in London. Anyway, so. We're all waiting. All these Hollywood heavies, they all have 100 projects going. And so you got to wait in line, and you're waiting and waiting, waiting. And suddenly I get a call from the producer, Julia Blake. And she says, we have a script, but I'm not going to send you a copy of it. And those are the 2 most frightening things a writer will ever hear. The second thing, because I was a journalist, I said, well, that was my first reaction. My second reaction was, that's not going to stop you from getting your hands on the script. So I made a couple of calls, and they sent me the first draft. Now, if you saw the first draft of what I would write, you would be horrified too. It's crap. But they said, I got my hands on the first draft of Stephen Knight's, and I totally freaked out. It had nothing to do with my book. It was, if I said white, he said black. I just totally freaked out. And one of my best friends was Kazuo Ishiguro. And he had several films made of his work. And I called up Ish and I said, Ish, I'm freaking out. I don't know what to do. Do I go in and pound my fist on the table, or do I just sit back? And he said, Richard, time out. He said, take a look at the names involved in your book. Lasse Hallström, Helen Mirren, Oprah, Steven Spielberg. He said, you don't want a bad film of your book to go out. He said, but these people are never going to let a bad film out of your book. And I said, okay, I accept that. And he said, second of all, if the film is not as good as your book, every review is going to say, go read the book. It's so much better than the film. And if it's a good film, everyone's going to go read your book. He said, so you're really in a win-win situation. So I completely relaxed. Once Ish told me, gave me that little pep talk, I completely relaxed, and it was a wonderful experience. I will say that I was blessed in the sense that usually writers, they pay you to go away. But Julia, she would periodically call me up when they were doing the casting, things like that. She would say, who do you think should be a director? Well, I originally wrote this to try and trick Ismail Merchant from Merchant Ivory Productions to make a film of something I had written. But when after he died, I thought that Lasse Hallström, who's very good at sentimentality, and the book is quite sentimental and hopefully in a good sense, that I thought that he would be a good director. So I told that to her, and lo and behold, that's who they got. The other one was Papa. I said, it has to be Ompuri. And Julia was, what, that ugly guy? And I said, trust me, go look at his work. He's perfect for Papa. And they came back, and sure enough, he was perfect for Papa. I have to tell you that I wanted Catherine Deneuve
Oh, who doesn't?
as Madame Mallory. I wanted a French actress, but I settled for Helen Mirren, who of course is.
Okay, well, you know, who doesn't want Catherine Deneuve or Helen Mirren, right? Who doesn't,
Exactly.
right?
Right.
Okay, so I'm going to segue right now to David. What is the one manuscript you read that didn't become a movie and that you wished it had?
A book?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a good story.
Oh, good.
It is a book called Forever. It was written by Mildred Cram. It's like a breath. It's hardly even a book. You could hardly even call it a novella. It's maybe 12,000 words, but it is the ultimate romance of a certain time. It was originally purchased at MGM for Judy Garland to star in.
Oh my God.
And Vincent Minnelli
Wow.
to direct. MGM had it. They had put $5 million into it over 5 decades. And I was a Paramount executive at the time. And like Richard said, we made a deal with MGM, you know, like MGM makes a deal with Sony for James Bond. So we were going to finance it together, and we took it over. And we were never able to quite get it right, because it was a story, quickly, which is about a man looking for a woman, had some disastrous relationships, a woman looking for a man, disastrous relationships. They meet finally, I think it was in Paris. They fall in love, they have a mad affair, and then they're killed in a car wreck.
Oh, my God.
And then they reunite in Otherworld.
Afterlife?
The Otherworld was always tricky and a problem. You know, there was the Bardo at one time, there was, you know, Purgatory in another. It was, you know, in none of our drafts, but in the many, many drafts. So it was written, I think, in 1927.
Wow.
And it's the longest project that I know of not to get made.
Wow.
Oh my God. I'm so glad I asked that question. Forever by Mildred Cram?
Yeah, C-R-A-M, yeah.
C-R-A-M. Okay, I wrote 2 M's. What an extraordinary story. Thank you, David.
Yeah.
And okay, so it's 8 o'clock and we have a lot of questions, and I'm going to turn it over to a Q&A. Barbara. Okay, somebody did ask, David, Mary Tyler Moore.
Oh,
Did you want her?
well,
How did you feel about that?
not that I had any real control over it. By that time, you know, Barry Diller, our chairman, had a crush on Ordinary Bob. You know, it's the Sundance Kid, and pretty much anything that Bob wanted, he got. I wanted Meryl Streep, and Bob were going to do it together at one time. And then when Bob fell out, because he wouldn't direct it, then Meryl Streep fell out, and Bob had always had Mary Tyler Moore in the back pocket. My problem was really a conceptual one, a business one. I felt that the material verged on a movie of the week at that time, you know, a $2 million picture that was made for NBC or ABC, et cetera. And I was worried with, I mean, personally, and I told Bob this, I was just worried about, you know, America's Sweetheart from television being in a feature film, and suddenly the material's looking very small. I did, there was an Austrian, Richard, you'll appreciate this, from being from Austria, owner of Paramount at the time, named Charlie Bluthorn. And, you know, he was a very interesting guy, but he controlled the purse strings. They all saw Ordinary People and didn't like it, and it tested very well. So that was something. And then even when it got whatever nominations it got, Charlie Bluthorn, and suddenly I was in meetings with Charlie Bluthorn, turned to me and he said, that movie cost too much to market. They had to pay an extra $1, you know, to get anybody into the theater. And that's what happens. Sometimes you just have to throw more and more money to get people to watch it. And so my attitude was really on a commercial level that I just didn't think that she had enough star power for movies. And that was a very different era.
It was a very different era, completely. John, we have a question for you. Is it true that you played a cassette recording of New York street noise to sleep at night when you were in Savannah? Oh, I think you're muted. John, you're muted.
No, I didn't. Savannah was the quietest, most beautiful city, but I didn't need New York noise. I knew I was going to be coming back to it.
Well, I have another question for you. It was, the genre was nonfiction novel.
Yes.
Can you
Why did that
explain
cause
a
problems?
little bit about that?
It caused problems. I wrote it in the style of a novel, as if I had made it up.
Right.
And in writing it, I said at the back of the book, and afterward, that I had taken some storytelling liberties. I mean, I wanted to tell the story in the best way possible to keep the reader fascinated all the way through. As I said, the murder only happens on page 168. Tom Wolfe pointed that out to me. How could you wait that long? I said, I had to, because I had to get all those characters in first, so that the reader would have a sense of the city. And when the murder happened, the reader would be as surprised as all the characters in the book and in the city were. So what was the rest of the question? What?
Sorry,
You're
I'm muted.
Amy.
Nonfiction.
Oh, no. So what I had to do was to insert myself into the story, because I wanted it to be a first person narrative. And I was speaking, it was my voice. But I wanted to get, as I said, to all the people, characters that I picked out to put in the book, but I also wanted to get into Jim Williams's story before the murder, and I met him afterwards. So I had to move things around. It made a much better story that way. I mean, I could have started out the book by, in the first page, could have said, we're going into this great mansion in Savannah, and the guy who owns it had just shot and killed his lover. Then what do you do? So I used that murder as something very important in the middle of the book. So I had to explain that I took some storytelling liberties, and I wrote in the style of the narrative was that of a novel.
Okay, so the narrative was that of a novel?
Yes, and I wrote all the chapters in Midnight as if they were articles in Esquire, which I was most used to because I had been on the staff of Esquire since college. And I had a sense of the drama that articles that we put in Esquire, the formats, the ambiance of articles in Esquire. And so to me, they were portraits of individuals that made up a whole universe of a city. And this universe, Savannah, was cut off from the rest of the world. It existed in its own environment. And I didn't have to make that up. That's actually true. However, I did take liberties. So that's why I wanted to call it a nonfiction novel, because it was basically nonfiction.
But it was also, yeah,
Mystery.
got it.
Yeah.
All right, Bob, I have a question for you that just came up. Could you share the third story?
Oh, I'm so glad somebody asked that, because it's really.
Somebody did, yes.
First of all, I want to just say one thing, John, before I get into that. John talked about Savannah as being a major character in the book. In that championship season, Scranton is a major character in the book. And the characters exist in the context of that city, which was, again, in the end of the 1960s, beginning of the 1970s, a working class town that was about to change. And the people who are the characters in championship season were the old guard, holding on to the world that they knew while the city and the politics and everything else was changing. But on to the third incarnation. And this may be more about the movie business than you are interested in. But in the 1970s, a group came out of Israel called Golan Globus. Golan Globus were two guys from Israel. One was a director, one was a money guy. They had a whole new philosophy about how movies should get made. And it was really a radical change. Up to then, the American studios always looked at Europe and Asia as a subsidiary market. They thought, well, the movies are going to play in the United States, and then they'll sell it in France, they'll sell it in Germany, and they'll get some money, and that's how to do it. Golan and Globus did it differently. They decided, they went to all the European and Asian and Latin American countries, pre-sold the movie based upon, and I will explain this, based upon a totally made up version of what that movie was going to be. And they would generate $500,000 from France, 3 million from Germany, 2 million from England. They'd put all that money together, and then they would have enough money to make the movie. And the US was the subsidiary market. And what they did, which was so fascinating, is building on what David said, they knew that nobody reads. So they knew that if the American studio executives didn't read, certainly the German distributors didn't read. And so what they did was they took a story and they turned it into something sexy and dramatic when there was no such thing. I mean, for example, they did a movie with Faye Dunaway called Duet for One. It's about Jacqueline Dupre having multiple sclerosis. When you saw what they wrote about it, there was Faye Dunaway with her skirt way over her knees, sitting in a sexy posture with a violin on her knee. And they would then describe the book, they described the movie as this sexy drama about this glorious violinist who has all these affairs and all these, and of course, the distributors read this and Faye looked fabulous. And they thought, all right, they put the money up for the movie. And what they were getting was a story about a woman with multiple sclerosis. And with championship season, it was the same thing. These are 5 good-looking ensemble players. Well, it was about adultery. It was about terror. And finally, they financed the movie because they were able to pre-sell championship season all over the world based on totally false premises.
I'm going to bring up a subject that I need to ask. You brought up something about Faye Dunaway and sexy, and I want to ask every one of you, John and David and Richard and Robert, in the world we're living in today, would you be able to make those kind of movies? Would you be able to make a movie that says she was sexy or voluptuous? Whatever kind, with Story Summit recently, we had Bobby Farrelly, was it Bobby Farrelly, David? Who literally talked about the fact that movies that they made then could not be made now.
Yeah, they did like Dumb and Dumber and
Right, and something about Mary. And I would like to ask that question to all of you. Are there characters in your books or movies, or David, movies that you would read, a manuscript that you would read now and go, this can't be made, not now? And I think it's an important question, and it comes off a question that somebody just asked. So.
I will start and say absolutely not. Movies aren't necessary. Well, movies in the 40s and the 50s and the 80s and the 90s, the allure of a movie was that it wasn't necessarily life, but it was life the way you would want it to be, even in a narrative construct, even if there were problems in the narrative. Today, with social media having such power, with the Me Too movement, with the ongoing equitableness between women and men, no, you couldn't do any of that stuff anymore. And it's hard to know exactly where it all falls from a movie standpoint today. I was taught, this is just quickly, this is the way the movie business runs. You call the head of a studio. Hello, Paramount Pictures calling. Yeah, Paramount Pictures. Hi, I'd like to talk to Jim Giannopoulos, the chairman. Hold on one moment, please. Jim Giannopoulos' office. Now you can hear the baby in the high chair asking for more applesauce. Yes, is Jim Giannopoulos in? Chairman of Paramount. Let me see if I have him. Okay, so, you get on Poland, and then you get Jim Giannopoulos, who is yelling at his dog in the bedroom, who has his slipper. So, Jim, what is going on? He had, question. He had worked on the original movie called Top Gun. They were coming out with another one. It had already been shot as a $180 million picture. It was supposed to come out July of last year, but of course with COVID, it couldn't. They had moved it to a streaming event for Christmas and then felt it just wasn't right because it's a big picture thing. And he was all troubled because now they're moving it to July 4th of this year. And will it even possibly work? And will people even come back to the movies? George Lucas once said, I don't care. I don't give a rat's how Star Wars plays. It can play on it can play on a cell phone. I don't care. It's the story that counts. Now, and I think that is what the future is. I think the future is story anywhere you can have it. And even on a large screen with lots and lots of people there, but I don't think it will ever return to what it once was. Because when you see Jodie Foster winning some award in the Golden Globes, and she's reaching over and kissing her partner, no problem there. but that would never, ever have happened 20 years ago. And it certainly wouldn't have happened because of the personality of Jodie Foster, who grew up in a system where that just couldn't be. So it's a very, very, very different time, and an exciting time because you can influence it. Because what stories do is they create the reality that you're going to walk into. And so if you want to walk into a reality where women and men are equal, where people can have sexual appetites, but it's looked at in a different way and a healthy way, then you've got to write it. And you've got to find the surrounding dramas and the conflicts and the obstacles and able to make those work. But the old paradigms, in my view, are all dead.
Oh, that's so profound.
And I think they're dead, because of what we've all gone through over the last year. And I don't think it'll ever return in the same way, ever, which is fine. The only
It is fine. And John, I'm going to segue right into you because your book covered an amazing amount of topics. You brought in, I would say, transgender, right?
Yeah.
And would you feel comfortable writing that book now?
Well,
because you really, really changed the dynamic with that book.
yeah, I think it was of its time, actually, and it wouldn't have the impact today if it were released, now.
Right.
But on another level, I like the stories in it and the way they hang together enough to write it now. But the themes that you're mentioning were new then and aren't anymore. In fact, they've gone beyond. Now, just to point out, the Midnight is being developed, I'm told, as a musical,
right?
Broadway musical. And it's been going on for years. But right now, Taylor Mack is involved in it, and he has written a script that is so beyond. It's new, whereas Midnight is no longer new. His adaptation of it, from what I've seen, is wild. He's brilliant. I was amazed at what he has come up with. But anyway, yes, so you can advance the themes to make them contemporary and beyond contemporary. And that's what, if they do this musical the way Taylor Mack is proposing, it will be fresh and the themes will be new.
That's profound, actually, right?
Yeah.
That is. Richard, where are you?
I'm here.
Okay, so you want to talk about writing books and writing novels and writing stories that maybe you couldn't have written or you wrote years ago that you can't write now?
Well, I have to say that I've been going through this always. To me, this is like not a news story.
Right.
I went to Sarah Lawrence College at 16, and one of my teachers was Grace Paley, the great short story writer.
Oh.
And Grace was kind of a writer's writer, and all her stories were about the Jewish Bronx. And one day, I was, I guess, 17, and I came into class, and she said, the reason we write is to show why we're different from other people. And I have to tell you that I was an American who was born in Portugal, raised in Switzerland, had never lived in America until at the age of 16, I went to Sarah Lawrence College. And I thought I was American, and then I got to the US and realized, oh my God, you're not really American because of your upbringing. And so I was in this weird state of not really knowing who I was, where I even belonged on this earth. And so I was feeling really alienated, and she came in and came into class and she said, the reason we write is to show why we're different from other people. And I heard this and I put up my hand, and with a shaking voice, I said, Grace, I have to tell you, this is the most irresponsible remark I have ever heard a teacher say. I said, I know why I'm different from other people, and I feel that alienation every moment of the day. And the reason I'm writing is to try and figure out what I have in common with other people. So all my novels are actually in the voice of someone very different from who I am. So it's a Muslim Indian chef. And honestly, I could not get published for 17 years. The 100-Foot Journey could not get published for 17 years until I got my break. And I remember going to see Lynn Nesbitt, who's one of the great literary agents in New York. And I showed her, I went hat in hand with my little novelette, and I showed it to her, and she said, well, Richard, this is very lively, but why would any publisher want to publish a book in the voice of an Indian from you when there are so many marvelous Indian writers around? And I heard that and I just freaked out, and I said, oh yes, you're right. And then I went out and I said, hang on, what you're telling me is that I can have an imagination around the circle you draw for me. And I said, that's not right. And so I have what we are now, and it goes through periods. I think that what's going on now is a very necessary dialogue.
Right.
That there is opportunity has not been evenly distributed. Your color has influenced your opportunity. The color of your skin has influenced it, and that is absolutely not right. But conversely, I think that has been that's a very legitimate gripe and has to be corrected. But there's also, I think, like all things in America, the pendulum swings excessively.
Yes.
And the room for nuance is not allowed. Everything is hysterical and faddish. It's so quickly and overrun. And that real thought and real sensitive approach and nuance is get trampled on. And I think that I don't think you should write in someone else's voice badly.
Ooh,
but I don't think it's but I don't think you should be barred from writing in someone else's voice. In fact, my personal view is that what America needs right now is people putting themselves in someone else's shoes. The problem that we're experiencing right now is that everyone's in their silos and there's no empathy for a different viewpoint. Well, how do you get a different viewpoint? Is you get a different viewpoint by imagining yourself in someone else's shoes. So I personally think I should be writing in a Black voice, a Black person's voice, so that I can feel what it's like to be in their skin. And they, a Black or a woman should be writing in a male voice. I think that when we start drawing circles about where people can have imagination, I think we're asking for trouble. As a people, we're asking for trouble. But anyway, so that's my politically incorrect response to the moment. And again, I don't want to belittle the very real suffering and the lack of opportunity that a lot of people of talent and weren't, white middle-aged dudes were cut out of, and that has to be corrected. But we shouldn't overcorrect and go into this like political absolutism that you cannot imagine or tell a story in a voice of a person different than who you are.
Can we all just give him like a moment of, like a standing ovation for that? Thank you so much for that answer. And I know that some of us are going to get a lot of shit for it.
Exactly. Yeah.
But
Amy, I'd like to add something to what he said.
yeah,
because
could you? That would be great.
It just, the other day, I watched again preparation of the film of Championship Season. And you must remember, Championship Season is a play that plays all over the country regularly. And when I watched it, I had never realized that these characters in Scranton in the 1960s were about as bigoted as any good Catholics in that period living in a coal mining town were. During the course of their evening together, they use the N-word. They refer to Jews as kikes and Maquis. They refer to Hispanics as spics. And this is the culture that they live in at that period. And I was wondering now, when the play is next produced or when the film is next seen, whether there's going to be a backlash because these words are used, and whether people are going to demand that the words be changed, when in fact, that is what that culture was at that time. And I don't know what any of you think about it, but this is true in so many cultural artifacts that take place at a particular point in time. And the question is, when they are redone, when they're resurrected, how does one deal with this kind of bigotry that is no longer acceptable?
And I'm going to now move over to David so that you can answer that question.
I think we're in for a tyranny of political correctness. And I think it's going to get pretty bad before it gets better. I think we're seeing that now with the whole Dr. Seuss thing. And despite all his marvelous, incredible work, and I got to know him because we tried to buy his library, and he's a good, solid man, but he is also a product of his time. You know, I think we're going to see a sweep of it for a year or two before it ultimately straightens itself out into something more reasonable. But the triggers that are happening when anybody does anything politically incorrect, certainly from the left side, is just, it's like a lynching mob. And many things needed to be done, and growth isn't easy, but yeah, I think it's going to be really tough. And I see it in Hollywood every day. Well, no, we don't want white people. We don't want white people directing. Where's your Saudi female to direct? Well, there aren't that many Saudi females, and the 5 that are good are already working for the next 2 years. But this is what, you have a classic. Can we put Black people in it? People of color. And I mean, it's a very, very big hotbed. And maybe we need to go through all that in order just to be able to create a better leveling field. But yeah, it's gonna be tough, in my opinion.
You know, this is actually one of the more incredible conversations that we're having. So thank you for that. Thank you. Thank you all for answering that question. And John, this is for you. When you were writing Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, was that something that came to you, or was that something that you felt you needed to write because you were a journalist?
Oh, it came to me. It came to me. I scrounged for it, but it came to me. I didn't feel any duty to be a journalist. I was a journalist. I mean, working as an editor at Esquire and writing the occasional article and a column, but it more or less, that particular book, as I was walking around Savannah and meeting people and spending time with them, I could hear and I could sense what I was seeing and hearing was usable in a book. It'd stand out. It was either a scene or a comment or a vision of some sort. So it occurred to me as I was working. It's a 20, as I said, I'm on duty 24 hours a day while I was in Savannah, ready for anything.
Okay, and I have another question for you because somebody wants to know, what are you doing? What are you writing now? And you wrote a book about Venice. So I'm just reading the question. And what has happened is, will that become a movie?
There have been approaches, but nothing so far. I think he would make a limited series, actually. There again, there are several stories in that book, nonfiction stories, real stories,
Right.
and different characters. And that's the way I see things, and that's the way I write. I'm not at the moment writing something. I am, as I said, editing columns that I wrote for Esquire for publication.
Okay. Robert, we have a question for you.
Yeah,
Are you ready?
sure.
Okay, so you were friends with the playwright. I'm reading this. Did that change your mind one way or the other because you were friends with him?
Well, what it did was made me so committed to getting this project done that I spent 10 years of my life doing it. You
Right.
know, I also ran a very successful law firm. A lot of the people that were mentioned tonight were all clients of ours. But getting championship season made and getting Jason's genius really being seen was terribly important to me. And I devoted so much time to it. And I felt like at the end of the period, when we had the big opening at Grumman's Chinese Theater in Hollywood, it was one of those big red carpet openings. And I said, you know, I'm glad we got it done. It satisfied something because I so believed in the work, and I really so believed in Jason.
Okay, so this is going to be the very last question of the night. Since you're all talking about book to film or theater or play, what would you say to a writer that wants to have their book turned into a movie or a play? I'm going to give each one of you 3 minutes. Bob?
Huh. You know, there are, in a year, there are 300,000 books published. Now, that sounds extreme, but that is the truth. Most of them are self-published books, especially now that the publishing world has been digitized. It's very, very easy for a writer to have his or her book published. It's a lot of books. I think more than ever before, because of the streaming services, there is a tremendous need for material, tremendous. And I would think that if I had to say one bit of advice to a writer is to write whatever you feel like writing, but get a good agent, because the agents are very important in this business. The publishing agents who deal with your book always, if they're significant agents, always have corresponding agents in Hollywood who can take your book and get it to the people who they think might be interested in making it into a movie. And if you're lucky enough to get an agent who loves your work and is prepared to help you get the book out there to people who might be interested in the material, that would be the best thing, the one best thing that I could suggest.
So what you would suggest is get an agent. Yeah?
Definitely.
Okay.
If you can.
David?
You're muted, David.
I think for the next year, things are still going to be slow. You know, case in point, you know, trying to get the chairman of Berendt on the phone, past the baby with the applesauce and the dog barking in the bedroom. Chairman of Berendt has not been on the lot for over a year now. Just case in point. Most publishing houses that I know of are working, you know, remotely. There's not the fire of a new voice or a new project, but it's still happening. Like Kate Medina fell in love with a book called Girls or something like that. It was a friend of mine. She closed her door, started reading past the first page. You know, as Richard says, it's always important past the first page. And in 3 hours, bought the book for $2 million. So, because she wanted to shut out the other competition, and she's got a very, very tough brandable, you know, branding oriented boss now, the Uber boss of Penguin Random House, who is really looking for brands, et cetera, et cetera. I think for the movie world, I would say don't get an agent, get a producer. Find a producer who believes. Agents have 10%. Producers have 6 or 7 figures they're looking at. And the important thing right now is that agents aren't really looking for new clients. They're just trying to keep their existing clients working. Now that's in the Hollywood side, not necessarily in the book publishing side. In the book publishing side, for me, it's a little bit more of an enigma. And as one of our close friends, Jeff Hart, said, what you need to do in a time like this is create inventory, create things that you really believe in,
Right.
that and that speak to a new world. I think it's important to not just write what you want. I mean, I think that's valuable, but you have to write to somebody's need, whether it be a fiction or you know, nonfiction. It needs to fulfill a need. And maybe if it does, it moves beyond the 300,000 to, you know, to the 100 that really sort of capture the imagination of the world.
Okay, Richard, you're going to follow that. Since you and I both know Jeff, so.
All right. So the question is, what advice I'd give to a writer who so I think the thing is that, you know, the film or a TV series is its own artwork. It's not your book. You might be the inspiration, but you have to respect the talent involved and that they know their business, and do not micromanage. What you want to do is you want to spend a lot of thought. If you are in a blessed position that you have some influence over the decision making and you're in the room with the decision making, then by all means work really hard on picking the right and getting your voice heard. In the decision making about who's going to be writing your script, but then back the fuck off. Just let them do their stuff. Be respectful, when it's appropriate for time of notes, and and trying to help them tell the best story they have to tell about, inspired by your work, rather than try and carbon copy what you wrote in your book. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And I love that you said, the word fuck. So, that makes me really happy. And John, we're going to end on you, because in a really wonderful way, you are Milford joy.
Well,
You are the reason, one of the reasons that we're all here tonight.
Oh,
So can you end on that note?
Nothing to say. I mean, as I started out just earlier, like 2 hours ago, whatever, I'm a writer. I'm not involved in movies, and I thought of a movie of Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil as a promotional ploy, and that would be great to sell the book. And so I'm the worst person to talk to for advice, because I'm cynical about I don't have any movie talents. I can't really envision a script of my books, but people who have experience in that line of work can do it. I'm terribly sorry I don't have any major advice to give.
Well, I think that the advice you could give is to let people know why they need to write.
Well, they don't need to write unless they have a desire to express themselves.
Can you take that away? Go ahead.
Need to write. Help me. Where would you want me to go with this?
Well, you just said a desire to write.
No. I don't know. A desire to. Why you should write is if you want to tell a story. You want that sort of thing. I mean, you have to feel motivated, and it comes from within. But I did want to make a point about writing in someone else's voice. I mean, that came up a while ago.
Yes.
The most astonishing example of that, and this is several years ago, when Medgar Evers was murdered in Jackson, Mississippi, Eudora Welty, who lived in Jackson,
Yeah.
was shocked. And she thought to herself, I know where that voice comes from. She knew what kind of person would have done that. So she sat down and that night wrote an interior monologue in the mind of the white person who would have shot Edgar Evers. And it's an amazing piece. The New Yorker ran it a week later. And when they were researching this, lawyers got involved with it. They had to take certain things out because the culprit was caught. And so much of what Eudora Welty had put in her piece, without even knowing who the culprit was right on target.
Oof.
It was scary. So if you have a chance, go look at her piece of whatever year that was. It's an amazing piece of writing in someone else's voice. She wrote in the voice of an uneducated white racist.
See how we got there, John? Do you see how we ended this night on you sharing probably the most profound piece that any one of us could ever read? Thank
Have
you.
you read it?
I have not, but I'm
Oh,
going
I
to.
would have it.
I'm going to see how we kind of did that. We got you there.
Yeah.
Thank
Well,
you.
Can you say the name of the Eudora Welty piece again?
I believe the title was, I know where that voice is coming from.
Okay.
I know
thank you.
where that voice.
It is astonishing, really.
Okay.
And she did it overnight.
Okay, I know where that voice is
Is
coming.
coming. That's the way I remember the title. I'll check it
Oh
out.
my God.
It's Eudora Welty, whatever year that Medgar Evers horror was.
Okay.
And you'll find it in the New Yorker.
John, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, it's 8:45. I know that we're ending now. Carol, do you want to come on?
Sure, well, hang on. There we are. Oops, wait a minute. Okay, Sean is actually prepared to close us out, but I would love to personally thank all of you, along with Edson. He and I co-chair our actual live Milford and Readers and Writers Festival. And as we know, 2019 didn't happen, or excuse me, 2020 didn't happen because of the COVID pandemic. We've had several people ask in the chat or ask me directly, are we going to do the event this year? We have not made a final decision on that because there's still some unknowns for the coming months, but I can absolutely commit on behalf of the board of directors that we are very hopeful that we are going to be able to do that. So thank you for being here, but I do want to turn it back to Sean because he has a few closing comments. And please go to our website. There's tons of information there. And again, we just love having you. So Sean, you want to take it over?
Sure. Oh, let's see, I have to do this. Hold on.
Are you using mine?
Wow, from outer space.
Yeah, the joy of having two microphones right next door to each other.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Amy, for such an amazing job moderating this and drawing all these interesting thoughts and anecdotes and perspectives out of our guests. And David and Bob and John and Richard, we appreciate so much your willingness to do this. I do want to make one comment that I just have to tell you that it's been giving me a little bit of an edge over the last few months. And it's the use of this phrase politically incorrect in cancel culture.
Yeah.
I understand exactly what is meant by that. And I share the thought, really? Is this like what? But I also find that sometimes we're using that phrase as a way of not digging in and understanding and really listening what it is that others are finding offensive in some of these things. That it's kind of like a penance we're paying for a dominant culture that has not paid attention to these things. So I just kind of felt compelled to say that. I've used those phrases, but I'm stopping myself now because I find that is almost a way of dismissing what is really going on and why it's of concern to people. Sorry, I don't mean to come in with a lecture, but it just was gnawing at me, and I felt like I needed to say something.
Thank you for saying
We
that.
have raised a little bit of money, about $143 during this program, which we appreciate. If you've enjoyed it, I urge you to go to milfordreadersandwriters.com and you can make a donation there. You will be able to see a video of this presentation tonight and share it with friends, as well as the videos about Milford and about the Readers and Writers Festival that were on the loop at the beginning of the session. Thank you so very, very much. We hope we will see you in the fall. I think we're all feeling a little more optimistic that there may be an opportunity for us to have a festival in person again. For those of you who have been to the festival before, we want to let you know that the Milford Theater is undergoing a thorough restoration right now with all new seating and state-of-the-art sound system and projection equipment. The new owner who is renovating it. So when we are able to have the festival live again, we'll be able to have it in that theater, newly renovated. And we look forward to helping to inaugurate that. So with that, I wish everybody a really nice evening. If you haven't been to Milford, I hope you'll come. We're just as warm and friendly and eager to welcome others, especially people who read. And we hope we'll see you sometime in Milford. Thanks.
Thank you, Sean.
You all.
Good night, everyone.
Night, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Good
Lots of
night.
people chiming in,
Night.
liking my little comment about.
Good night, Carol.
incorrect.
Good night.
Well, one is a comment that right-wing people use and one is a comment that left-wing people.
Well, yeah, Gilby points out that politically incorrect.
That was great.
Hi, Diana. I see you, Diana.
That was fantastic.
I love you, Diana.
I love you. I miss you. You guys are great. This
Oh,
was
yeah. it's
marvelous.
approximately- Yeah, that's
Just
funny.
I love you.
Bye, everyone. Bye.
As there
Bye.
are absurdities that arise.
Yeah.
On. Thank
Wait.
you.
I don't have food here. I usually do, but I don't.
I don't know.
You want me to go to,
For simple.
Carol,
Costa?
we can have fun with this now.
The Italian place right across, Columbus.
Yeah, we can go there.
I'll come over there.
That was good. That
So
was-
I
that
don't
was-
know if I can get in.
How about the place over in Amsterdam that has the great pizza?
Turn it off.
You mean, the turkey place?
No, there's a place in
Carol.
Amsterdam.
Carol, can you hear me?
Yes.
Down a couple blocks to the
off.
left.
Okay.
On.
And it's not real big. Pizza oven's there.